Almost anytime I see another angler on the water, I'll stop and chat with them for a minute. And a question I get asked a lot, or I have been asked a lot over the years, is what setup are you running? And I'll ask a similar question, like, what are you catching them on today? Something like that. But when they see that I'm running braid to a leader, a lot of times they'll ask, what type of braid or what pound of braid are you running? And what pound of fluorocarbon leader are you running? And most of the time, I'm honestly not using a fluorocarbon leader. I'm running a mono leader. And when I tell people that, a lot of times I get this look like I've got two heads or something. But for the way I fish, I lean towards mono for a leader more often than fluorocarbon. And in this video, I'm going to talk about why that is. I think fluorocarbon is really good for a few things. No arguments there. But I also think it gets too much credit for a few things that are not quite as simple or straightforward as people in marketing make them sound. Also think a lot of anglers get pushed into fluorocarbon because they hear three things. They hear that it's invisible, they hear that it doesn't stretch much, and it's more sensitive, and they hear that it's abrasion resistant. And when you hear all that, it sounds like a pretty easy decision, honestly. Why not use it if all of those things are true? But that's not the full picture. Fluorocarbon does have some real advantages. I'm not arguing any of that. But once you start fishing around rocks, shell, docks, barnacle sand, anything that really abrades your line or can nick your leader, that conversation changes. And that's when I started trusting mono more. I learned a lot of this fishing on the South Texas coast where I grew up. Now, where I push back is when anglers start treating fluorocarbon like it's automatically better at everything. One of the biggest claims you hear is that fluorocarbon has no stretch or very little stretch, but that's really not true. And I know people argue this one because fluoro does feel different than mono. You can see it in its manageability. It's much stiffer, it coils more typically. And it is more sensitive because it takes more to make it stretch, but it still stretches. It just requires more force to start stretching than mono. But once that force is there, it still stretches. Now, thinking about abrasion resistance, it's not just one thing, right? It's not just abrading against one single thing. It's not always the same what it's going against. And fluoro does have a harder outer coating, and it may be harder overall. And it can take a little more to start that abrasion, but there's a big difference between a line resisting light scuffing and a line staying strong after it gets nicked. Those two things are not the same thing. Fluorocarbon having that harder surface, it takes light abrasion better, and it may resist better against that first rub pretty well, but once it gets a nick, that nick becomes a serious weak point. And I'm not saying that mono doesn't get damaged, because mono does get damaged too, but mono is much softer and it's more forgiving. But when it gets roughed up, I have a lot more confidence that it will give me a little more warning before it fells. Fluoro can look okay, it can feel mostly okay, and then pop! When pressure hits, that damaged spot, boom, it just breaks. And that's the part I don't like. And that's cost me a lot of fish over the years before I really understood it. I figured this out over time, and I figured it out the hard way. Like I said, I grew up on the South Texas coast, and when I was fishing down there, I spent a lot of time around rough stuff. There's oyster beds, there's barnacles, there's sand, there's shell. Baffin Bay, where I fish most of the time, has these reefs that are made by prehistoric worms. And then you have the speckled trout, which have these teeth. They typically have like one or two fangs in the front, and then they have rows of these needle-like teeth. And then you also have dock structure. And all those things beat up a leader. And for a long time, I bought into the idea that fluorocarbon was the tougher leader. So I used it. But I started noticing I was breaking off more with fluorocarbon than I ever did with mono. The more I looked into it, the more it started to make sense to me, because what I found is fluorocarbon, it's harder, and you notice that once again because it coils up a lot more, it's stiffer, right? But once it gets a nick in it, that damage spot becomes a major weak point. And Salt Strong, the channel, has a really good video showing the abrasion testing between fluoro and mono, and it's really eye-opening. So when I'm fishing around rough cover, forgiveness matters, and I'm running mono for my leader. And that sounds small, but it costs people fish, and that's why I'm leaning mono in those situations. If this kind of video is clicking with you, consider subscribing. It helps the channel. And this is what that channel is all about. No hype, no gimmicks, just the stuff that really matters. And I've asked a lot of time, why do I lean towards mono for a leader most of the time? And I have three pretty significant reasons. The first reason is shock absorption. Mono has more initial give and better shock absorption than you have with fluoro. Like I said, fluoro will still stretch. It just takes a lot more to make it stretch. So when a fish is surging, it jumps, it shakes its head, it's close to the boat and it makes a run, or the bank and it makes a run, that little bit of give, it's not a bad thing, right? And that's especially true for me because I'm running braid as my main line, and braid has almost no stretch. Like 90% of the time, I'm braid to a mono leader. So having that mono leader gives me a little more cushion. The second thing that I like mono more for is knot. I like the polymer knot. Probably it's the knot I tie the most, and it's not a great knot with fluorocarbon. With fluorocarbon, I have a lot more confidence in the double uni knot where you run the line through the eyelet twice and then tie a uni. And I just trust mono with knots more. It seems to tie easier, it clinches down cleaner, it doesn't get that line burn as easily as fluoro does. With fluoro, you have to be real careful when you're tying a knot. You have to make sure that you've wet it well, that when you clinch it down, you're taking your time and you're doing it slowly so you don't burn or kink it. So, knots, that's definitely a reason that I lean towards mono. And the third thing is what we just talked about, is line damage. And that's probably the biggest one for me. When I'm around rough stuff, I just trust mono more. You still need to check it and you still need to retie. But in my experience, mono does not fail as suddenly or catastrophically as fluorocarbon once there's a nick in it. Now, I know somebody's probably going to say, well, why not just run mono all the time if mono is so good? Why use fluorocarbon at all? And that's a fair question. I do still use fluorocarbon. It's just not the default leader line or main line for me most of the time. But there are times when I still use it as a leader, when I still use it as a main line. Clear water is probably the most often when I'll use it. If the water is really clear and the fish are pressured, if they're line shy, I'm likely to go with a fluoro leader or straight fluoro, especially if the visibility is costing me bites. And finesse is another one. If I'm fishing lighter line, clear water, really small baits, if the fish are really looking things over. So I'm not anti-fluorocarbon at all. I just don't think fluorocarbon should be the default because somebody told us it was better. Because I fell for that for years. I used it off and on because I thought it was just a better leader material in all conditions. But it's not. It's just a tool. The same as braid is a tool, the same as mono is a tool. Use it when the job calls for it. And that might be the most important part. It doesn't matter if it's mono, fluoro, or braid. If the leader is nicked, retie. Don't talk yourself into one more cast on a damaged leader. That might cost you a trophy fish. The biggest mistake we can make is choosing a line based on the label, marketing, or hype instead of the job. Anglers hear fluorocarbon leader and they assume it's the upgraded choice. And I did too for a long time. But the better question is, what problem are you trying to solve? If it's a visibility problem, fluoro might be the answer. If it's a sink rate problem, fluoro again might be the answer. If you need more shock absorption, easier knots, better forgiveness around rough stuff, mono may be the better answer. So don't start with the line because of what people have said or the marketing. Start with the job. What's your take on fluoro? When do you actually reach for it? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. I read every one and I do respond. All right, that's it for this one. We'll see you on the next one.